let me say a little something about God. I was brought up in a Christian home. My dad was going to be a Baptist minister for a while before he got married and had to get a real job, became a contractor. And then when he married my mom, she was a Lutheran. So I automatically became a Lutheran because she wasn't going for the whole fire and brimstone thing that you sometimes got in the Baptist churches she'd heard about. Well, we were raised Lutheran, and when I was born, I had a lot of health issues. And the story goes that the church prayed for me and that I overcame all that. So from an early age, I guess I had this relationship with God. And growing up, we went to church pretty much every Sunday. And every Sunday, we would also repeat the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, which the Council of Nicaea put together first in the 320-something, and talks about all the structured beliefs that the Roman Catholic Church had come up with. After about 4 months of discussion and arguments and all that, they came up with this idea of what God was. That he was three parts, that Jesus was him and wasn't born but always was, and lots of things like that. And so we would repeat this every single week. And when I was in 5th grade, I played hooky a couple times and lied about it. So my parents felt that I wasn't getting enough morality training. So I went to a Christian school starting in 6th grade. It was West Florida Christian, fundamental evangelical, where I had Bible class 5 days a week. Well, twice a week we had, what do you call those? Chapel services, and early on got very, very into that, and even at my church, because I was getting it so much in school, I was like, I knew more than everybody else in Sunday school about the Bible and everything about it. And 8th grade, I went to an Episcopal school, and it wasn't as indoctrinated that much. They didn't really talk about it all that much as the Baptists did. And then I went back to the Baptist school after almost going to a Catholic school for a while, but I just didn't want to do the uniforms. Anyway, throughout my teens, and I was 15 or so, I started going to the Baptist church regularly because they had a better youth group and prettier girls. And I kind of really got into being a Baptist. When I was 15, I had to give my testimony before the church with my parents there and everything, visiting. And I really hadn't sinned all that much, other than, lying when I played hooky and a few other times when I wanted to get away with something. But the worst thing that I had done is I found a cigarette in my mother's car. I think my brother's girlfriend might have dropped it or something. Either way, I found it and I smoked it. Mm-hmm. And we lived on 11 acres of property. And the backyard was up against high-hat cattle property, hundreds of acres. But I thought that the best place to smoke that cigarette while Mom and Dad were out was in their bathroom because there was a vent. Anyway, story for another time. So anyway, I was a terrible sinner, and when I told that story, I kind of said, "Surprise, Mom," and told them what a wretched, terrible person was, and that I deserved to be punished for all of eternity for things like that. And there you go. Here I am, and now I'm saved, and da-da-da-da. And I continued to go to Jesus festivals and Christian concerts, and I would go to, I was really into being a Christian because it was the one solid thing in my life, going from different schools throughout there. Because then I went to another Christian school in 11th grade, and then I finally went to high school with the other sinners in 12th grade. And then I even went to kind of a Baptist school. I was part of the Baptist campus ministry, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and all that. And was very involved with that. But I was never an evangelist. I never felt inclined to really share the gospel with people or, go around asking them the evangelical explosion questions of, if you were to die today, would you go to heaven? And if you got to the gates of heaven and God said, why should I let you in? What would you say? And there are these two questions they came up with. And I never really inclined to get people to believe these things that I believed about God. They were kind of more mine, and it was wonderful and all that. But I also felt myself getting more and more judgmental as I got a little older and into it, and listening to the Christians like Rush Limbaugh and all that. So I started really having some conflicts in my faith. And going to college, I took classes in the Gospels and religious images of the future, and a few different classes on the Bible, and realized that there were errors, actually. I was taught to believe that there were no errors at all, completely infallible, perfect work of art. And then as years gone on, I kind of learned that this was also something that the church kind of decided, first with Athanasius putting together his letter, I think 362, was the first time it was recommended that these particular books should be part of the canon. And then it took quite a while for the church to actually adopt that, but eventually they did. And the Bible we have is the Bible that the people of the church, all the bishops got together and kind of voted on and worked out. So I started to really doubt the idea that this book was perfect and man-made and all of that. And I also had a big problem with the fact that the first commandment is that you shall have no other gods before me. This was what God commanded to Moses to write down first. But if you go to most Christians' websites, most Christian churches, and you look at their statement of belief, the first thing is the Bible, and the second thing is God. See, I think those priorities are a little mixed up there. And so I have a problem with that. And my sister asked me a few years ago why I wasn't a Christian anymore. And I can't really go by that name because I don't believe that it's genuine to following Christ. And there was a time in my life when I was having all of these doubts and decided to take my sinner's path. I grew up in a church where every Sunday evening we'd have somebody coming in telling about the terrible things that they did in their life, and then how Jesus, snapped them and turned them around and stuff. And I guess I just figured that, Jesus wasn't really getting his, everything out of me that he could have, and I could have sinned a lot more. And I felt that for a long time, in a weird way, that my allowing myself to have addictions, be they tobacco and alcohol and marijuana over the last couple of decades or so, that it was my just being as human as possible. And those were the sins that I was carrying for mankind, and still trying to do the best that I can with that. And there was a part of me who believed that God would heal me of these, and if not heal me of the ailments that they were going to bring to me. Give me lung cancer or heart disease or whatever, that I could be miraculously healed from all of that. But I could never bring myself to letting these things go. And they just became a big part of my life. And I felt that somehow that was the sacrifice that I made. And I guess that was the sin that I would go to hell for. But I never really, wanted to hurt anybody or anything like that. It was just always this self-harm thing, which seems to be a big part of my society. We have a lot of these issues with addictions, and I don't know. I felt my part of playing it with my part of playing it. But I realized that the hell that I have had to endure because of that are all of the moments in my life where I know that I've missed out on life, where I know that I haven't been all that God would have me be, or all that I could be, standing on my own because I was savoring some silly addiction and I wasn't giving myself fully to life. But God never let me go. And the big issue that I had with Christianity, and still have with Christianity, was when you're selling these ideas, this evangelism explosion thing where you've got these two questions, and the right answer, by the way, is if you were to go to heaven, or if you were to die, would you go to heaven? That's the question. The answer is yes. And if the reason is why, then why should you get in there? Because you proclaim that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior in your heart and in your mind and stuff like that. I forget the exact wording now. I think it's believed in your heart and spoke with your mouth, okay? Because the deal is, the foundation of the faith is that after God made everything good, like the first chapter of Genesis says. God made day was good, and night was good, and water was good, and the air was good, and the plants were good, and people were good. And then takes a day off. And he tells this couple that he's created to not eat these two trees. One is the tree of eternal life, because then you live forever like a vampire, and that wouldn't be all that great, I guess. And then the other one is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So with that, they then said, oh, there's evil too, because before that it was just good. And the story that is often told in evangelical Christianity is that because of that, humans became sinful, and God couldn't be in their presence. And there's a separation now because of that. And so because of that terrible sin, as though the story goes, every Homo sapiens to ever breathe life must be punished for all of eternity because they're just terrible sinners. And I don't believe those things for a couple of reasons. One, when you say God couldn't or God can't, I'm sorry, we're not talking about the same God. Now, I get that you're talking about the Catholic God, the Jewish God maybe, but you're not talking about the God of everything. We're talking about the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the thing from which all things come. I am that I am. There's nothing that God can't do. This is an energy beyond any of our limited thoughts. And this idea that we could be separated from God, and actually separate from God, I just don't buy that either. Now, we may think we're separate. We may associate with our egos. We may associate with our strifes or our struggles or whatever. But we're not separated from God. When God made all things, what did he have to work with? He had God. That's what he used. He used himself. She used herself. It used itself. I'm not worried about the pronouns right now, but I know a lot of you have a he persuasion on that, which I will address as well. But I couldn't address it now. See, there's a few ideas that we have about God, we have had about God in the past. I wrote a book called Money, Sex, Power, and Faith, questioning the building blocks of our civilization a few years ago. And there's a great audio book out there. If you like the sound of my voice, please find it on Audible or wherever you listen to books, or get it on Amazon if you want to. But I looked at like the last 10,000 years or so when Homo sapiens became what we are and how we developed the money that we have. You know, we created this. We created our what is it, money, sex? Oh yeah, the whole gender gap, how we created these gender roles for ourselves. Power, of course, our governmental systems, and then of course faith, and how that has changed over the last 10,000 years or so, and how the church came into existence. You know, and a couple of years ago, I visited a woman named Laura George. She's got a trilogy of books that I do highly recommend. One of them is called The Truth About the 5 Primary Religions. She was a lawyer and has just really put an amazing amount of work into this, and it's very well written, very well documented. And if you're interested in God beyond religions, I want to see how the religions that we have came to be and where some of the manipulations have been, you might want to check this out. She's also got another one called about love and one about light, and the light of the new humans. And I recommend the trilogy. But in it, she talks about this idea, which I think is pretty much true based on my understanding. You know, before we became Homo sapiens, we were just part of all that was. You know, we weren't separate from anything. We were just part of all of that. Then when we came into being, and we started being more aware of ourselves and creating our egos, there was a separation between ourselves and all that is. And because the females of us were able to produce life right out of their bellies, they were honored for that, lifted up. And what we know of with God was considered as a goddess. And you look at all the art from that time period that we have found, and it's all about the women. And the swollen breasts and swollen bellies, and honoring that sacred feminine. So for a long time, humans served God as a goddess. Now, years went on and storytelling ensued and our creativity went wild. And we started creating new stories about little sub-gods and these other gods. And then we started creating these religions that had many, many, many gods. So you had all the Greek religions with all their different gods on Mount Olympus. You had the Romans with all their planets and stuff. Then you had the Hindu religion, of course, which is the only one that's really stuck around from that era. But it's still there. We can still see it. They got gods for all kinds of stuff. And you can even see a little bit even in the Catholic Church, which sort of adopted that as the Catholic Church was created by the Roman Empire, using various bits from the paganism that they were trying to squash, from the new Christianity, and of course from the Jewish religion as well. But where was I? So anyway, when that started to emerge in the Catholic Church, now you see the many, many gods kind of as the many, many different saints and stuff. But you still come to an idea where God is a male. And this is for the last 2,000 years or so, as we have had this very male God, because we have a patriarchal society and have in many fashions for a very long time. I know that's hard for a lot of people to hear, but that is a great truth. You know, if you look at the Judeo-Islamic Christian tradition from whence all this comes out of the Middle East, you know, God has a big old, and you are, yeah. So that's the idea behind that, is that God is now a male and a man. We have this idea of connecting with that. And over the years, I've had some issues with that because I also saw the feminine principles coming into my life as I kind of walked away from Christianity, and also open to this idea that the provider of all of my breaths is still providing all of my breaths. And is providing this wonderful world in which I get to live, and the relationships that I get to cultivate, and the experiences that I get to have. And there's something there that I still connect with. Even though I don't believe all of the religious dogma, I still connect with this sense that there is something there, and that it wants to use me. And it's going to use me through the love that I have to share, whatever services that I can offer. And my life has been very challenging, I'll say, in trying to figure out how to best use my gifts, especially considering the handicap I've put on myself so many times, and not thinking myself fully able to do this, and having a lot of doubt about, you know, God and me and the whole thing. But I've come around and I still have a relationship with the creator of all of my breaths. And I can't say that I believe all of the tenets of the Nicene Creed. I cannot say that I will give fealty to the Roman Empire and the religion that was created out of that, and the limitations they have put upon God, or even the 66 books they collected to have us drag around the history and laws of the Jewish people from generation to generation to generation to generation, or the hand-picked, selected gospel accounts and the many letters of Paul. And I don't give fealty to all of that. I've seen much beauty in them. Paul was a really great poet, but he was also a man and rather a misogynist. And the fact that most of the Christianity that I kind of grew up with was really more about celebrating his view of Jesus and his ideas on who Jesus was, what it was all about. And that's how the Roman Church kind of took that, whereas he was the sacrifice because all of us needed to be punished because we're just terrible. And I think there's much more than that. And there was a time, of course, when I left the church that it did not even resonate with the Gospels anymore. I read all 4 of them at this time before I was like going out of my mind. And it just didn't make any sense at all. So even Jesus didn't make sense to me for a little while. But I'll come back around. And I had an issue with the fact that when I did like a word count, or looked up a word count on the internet to see how many words did Jesus have in the Bible, and this is about 12,500. And when you look at how many words Paul contributed to the Bible, it's about 12,500. It's roughly the same, you know? And so much credence is given to Paul's account, even though I remember a verse in there where he says he thinks it's better for a man to be single, which I am, and serve God than it is to be married. But he says that's just his opinion, and that's great. And I appreciate that he gave his opinion. He shared his poetry and his beautiful thoughts, but I ain't about to worship him like a lot of other Christians do. I realize it's his perspective, and I do appreciate that. But the fact that for most people coming into the church, they are guided down the Romans road. They are guided down Paul's understanding of what Jesus said instead of Jesus's understanding of what Jesus said. And that's a big issue that I have with the church. And I think that that's a big realization that a lot of people are coming to, that there's something a little bit off kilter and there's something amiss. And I think now you see a revival in the church that's not about Paul's message as much, but more about opening to miracles and opening to healing and opening to prophecy and those sorts of things. Because as I mentioned before, I never felt like I was an evangelist. I just didn't get into that. But I kind of felt inclined to be a teacher or a bit of a healer and mostly a prophet. And those are all spiritual gifts that were talked about, but the only training the church provided was for the evangelists. And I just didn't resonate with that job, you know? I wish there were trainers in prophecy, you know, and show us how to do that a little bit. Or especially in healing and in miracles. And I see that happening now, not necessarily in any of the big churches and the main denominations, but in the smaller cliques that are coming out of them, the smaller sects that are rising out of them. I have a friend of mine, Elizabeth, who wrote this book, The Sovereign Way. And this one is another one I highly recommend. If you have any curiosity about Jesus or how you can have a relationship with that word, again, without completely giving fealty to the Roman Empire or any of the religions, what do you call them? The prescriptions? No, what are they called? Those denominations, yes. Any of the denominations or anything. This is more about you having a relationship with the creator of all that is, you know? So I do recommend that. And she still probably uses the word Jesus a little bit more than I do, but I still connect with the essence of Christ, because that's the essence that I've seen in every hero I've ever looked up to, is this essence of, you know, greater love has no man than a man lay down his life for his friends. And if anything of Jesus' story is true, and I don't know if it is, and I'm great with that, I'm fine not knowing, but I still have a relationship with the idea that you can, that life is more than what we think it is, and even death doesn't hold us down and doesn't keep us from forgiving and doesn't keep us from doing amazing things and changing the world, as Jesus did. Whether he was a human or just a story, he has changed the world. And he's brought this idea of forgiveness mainstream, which I've seen through most other religions that I've ever studied, to have the character of Christ, regardless of whether you believe the history exactly. They're just words. They're just stories that we've told ourselves all these many years. And I still believe in God. I was never looking for another religion. And I never bring myself to being a complete atheist, saying, nope, it's all just random chance. And I stand on my desire to not believe in anything. And it's fine, you know, for anybody who wants to, but I've seen too much synchronicity. And I've seen the wonderful way my life has been provided for. And I'm grateful. So all this to say is that I know that we are going through a time when there is a lot of people who are dropping out of religions, a lot of people who are getting into religions. Be careful of what you believe. Be careful what you cling to. Let go of the need to cling to anything or to have the one true way or the right true way. Have love. Be love. Find ways you can serve people. Reach out to people who may need some compassion or some joy or whatever. But we're given 1,440 minutes, and each one of those minutes is filled with a whole lot of opportunity to stop, slow down, breathe, Close your eyes, feel God run through you, feel every one of your cells start to vibrate with aliveness as much as you want to. Your attention is yours. Where you bring it is yours to decide. And in having a relationship with God, it's often been said to many Christians that it's not a religion, it's a relationship. And I get that. I appreciate that they have a relationship, but it's within the confines of Council of Nicaea and the relationship that you're allowed to have with their version of what God is. I think God is bigger than all those religions. And I think there's something still moving that's crying out for humans to connect with that spiritual essence of who we really are, connect with that spiritual sense of who we really are and what Christ in us really means. I tried to explain a little bit of this to my parents as we were hunkering down for the latest hurricane. And I was saddened a little bit when my dad said that he found it was sad that I didn't have Jesus in my heart. When I was young, I asked Jesus to come into my heart on a few different occasions just to make sure. And if he's not in there, it's because he ain't coming. But he's there. I feel him. I feel him all the time. I don't always listen, but I feel that sense that I am connected to something greater than myself and that it wants to use me. And as I give myself over to it and open myself up to just being love, being the servant that I can be, and appreciating what I've got, I'm living each day in gratitude. And God, as I know it, continues to provide. And I'm very blessed in the life that I've lived. Although I'm shameful, which is the sin and the hell that I've created for myself, I'm also blessed out that there is grace and there is forgiveness and that every moment is new. So, God bless.